Welcome to the Daf Yomi Yerushalmi. We've reached the final shir on Maseches Shabbos. A special shout out to Mr. and Mrs. Cal Nathan for the ongoing sponsorship of the Yerushalmi Shirim. The Shirim were sponsored in the schus of the return of all the hostages and the end of the war in Eretz Yisrael. We're holding in Shabbos Daf Kuf Yud Gimel in the Oiz V'Odor edition, the final daf of the Masechta. We're starting in Daf Kuf Yud Beis and Yud Beis on the bottom, beginning of the 23rd parak. As mentioned, the last four prokim in the Masechta does not have Gemara, has Mishnah only. So the Mishnah in Halacha Aleph. As we know in Lashon HaKodesh, the word borrow can be used in two different connotations. Is Lashon of Hashala, someone who lends something to his friend, an item to be used, and there's Lashon Halva, which is a loan. The halva is something which is usually for 30 days, and someone may come to write it. So a person can borrow items from his friend, but not using the lashon of halva, which is a long-term loan, and it's something which he will come to write down. Continues the Mishnah of Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. Similarly, when a woman takes from her friend breads, she used the lashon of hashala, not halva. A person is taking from his friend, and the lender does not believe him, they'll return it back. He could give him a collateral, as the Pnei Moshe mentions over here. Given the collateral is allowed on Shabbos, that's the Chiddush. So if someone needs to take from his friend an item, he needs to pay him, or needs to pay for the loan, he does the cheshbon after Shabbos. On Shabbos itself, he just gives him a collateral in silence. And Erev Pesach on the Shabbos, that's going to be Be'ez Hashem this year. A person give a talis to the one who sells animals. He eats his korban Pesach. After Yom Tov, he comes does a cheshbon, how much he owes for the sheep. One can count different portions of food and his guest by heart, but not by writing, because he may come to erase. One could do a raffle on the table to decide who gets which piece of food. But you should not say, oh, you won the raffle, you're getting a big piece, and you lost the raffle, gets a small piece. Because that's a problem of kubyo, that's a problem of gambling, which is asur. So one could put a raffle also on kochim that were done on Yom Tov, because the Kohanim want to eat it. And chaviva mitzvah shaita to be eaten that day. Avaloi lamonos, what's loy lamonos? The Reb Chaim here brings two explanations. Either means the manos are the ones that were done yesterday, not today. So now you could have done yesterday, so you're not allowed to do it today. Or things which are chulin, which are not kochim, that you also cannot do that on Yom Tov. Halacha Gimel Zog the Mishnah lo yiskor paralim b'Shabbos. A person cannot hire workers on Shabbos. You should not tell somebody else to hire workers, even though he's not paying them on Shabbos. One cannot go on Shabbos to get closer to the tchum, so the minute Shabbos ends, he's close to the place where he needs to hire workers and to bring fruits. Because anything you cannot do on Shabbos, you cannot go on Shabbos to get closer to that place. That's called machshichim. You get closer to get there as it gets dark. Aval, machshichu lishmoy umevi peres biyotei. But one can get dark to go guard his fruits, because guarding on Shabbos is mutter. So he can also get closer to an area where he can guard his fruits, and even though then he's able to bring his fruits, but because the main intention is for guarding, it's allowed. So the Chaim points out that Bashol comes to argue, because according to Tanakama, you can only be machshich only for something you could do on Shabbos Yom Tov. Bashol says anything I could talk about, I could do achshacha, meaning anything which is a devar mitzvah, I could also be machshich doing Shabbos to get there. As Allah Chadal goes on to explain, one could go on Shabbos to get close to the tchum in order to take care of iski kalo, which is a chasano, and iski ames, the lavayo, and to bring for the mace orun metachichim, meaning to get closer, so right after Shabbos, you can take care of the coffin and the chichim of the mace. So because that's something you could speak about on Shabbos, you can be machshech on Shabbos. Continues the Mishnah, Goy shivi chalilim Shabbos. Goy brought flutes on Shabbos to use for the lavayo. Lo yispoid behem Yisrael can bo milk korv. Yisrael cannot use it because that's a malacha that was done by a goy on Shabbos, unless it came from a place which is in the tchum, and then it's not a real Easter Shabbos deraisa. If they prepared a coffin and they dug a grave for a goy, he covered by Yisrael, so Yisrael can use it as well. But if it was done for the Yisrael, he covered by Lamis, then Yisrael cannot use it forever. And the reason why you're marked forever, because everybody's going to know about it. It's going to be something which is enforced to everybody, and therefore it's asur. Halacha is the Mishnah referring to a mace. We know a mace is muktzes. You're not allowed to move him, but you're allowed to touch a muktzeh, and you're allowed to do things which should tzorich a mace for the cover of the mace. Zok the Mishnah. Hoisim kol tzorich a mace. You're allowed to do everything that mace needs. Sachin, putting oil in it, umadichim, washing him, oisoyu, without shelo yazuz bo'ever, as long as he doesn't move any limb. You can move the pillow, and you can put him, throw him on the sand, in order for him to cool out and not to get too hot. But you can't do by yadayim, it's only by him, by doing lachayat. You can tie the cheek of the mace, and not to close his mouth, should not open more. When you have a beam that broke, you could put a bench or the arukas amito, the poles of the bed, not to pick up the beam, because the beam is muktzeh. It should not fall more. You're not allowed to shut the eyes of a mace on Shabbos. Also, you're not allowed to close the eyes of a mace as he's dying, even during the weekday. Someone who shuts the eyes of a mace as he's dying, that just expedites his death, and that's considered to be shofech damim. It's considered to be that he killed that mace. That's the end of the 23rd parak of Masechah Shabbos, Hadrach Shoyel Be'ezer Hashem. Starting the 24th parak of Masechah Shabbos. Someone is walking the way and suddenly becomes dark. And he has a wallet. What should he do? Chachamim were makel on him because they knew that if he's not going to makel, he will carry on Shabbos. So what should he do? He gives his wallet to a goy. If there's no goy with him, he can put it on a donkey. So as Rav Chaim points out what it says in the Bavli, you can't put things on a donkey on Shabbos. That's called mechamer. But here what he does is he puts it on the donkey while the donkey is walking, and he removes it before the donkey stops. So the donkey is never doing a kir and anachot. There's no full melocha d'oraisa on Shabbos. Continues the Mishnah of Kuv Yigimon with base. He comes to the outside, the first courtyard in the city, which is Mokom Mishtamer. Now things are kept over there. So Noisel Zakeim and told him Shabbos he can pick up with his hands whatever is not muktzeh. The Sheinin, he told him whatever is muktzeh, Matir Sachavolim Vasokim Neiflim, he unties the ropes and he lets the sacks fall down. Halacha base Matirim Piki Amir Lifnei Abeimo. One can untie bundles of straw in front of an animal, because while it's still tied up, the animal won't eat it. So the minimum amount of preparation you need in order for the animal to eat it is to unbundle it. Umifasvesim es a kipin avaloi es azirin. Kipin is cedar branches which are moist, and zirim is what we mentioned before. Pki Amir, it's the straw bundles. Just there, you're talking about a more tight straw bundles. And what the Mishnah is teaching us is you're not allowed to scatter it unless it's necessary. So the moist ones, if you don't scatter it, the animal won't touch it. So therefore you're allowed to scatter it. But the zirin, the dry ones, even though it's tied three together, you still can't scatter it because the animal doesn't need it. One is not allowed to shred not the straw and not the carobs and in front of a domestic animal or non-domestic animal. If you do mati b'charuvim l'daka, it says carobs for a domestic animal you could do. In other words, the question is, what is needed for these animals? Only what's needed you could do. Halacha gimel zok the Mishnah, oivsim es agomol v'loy dorsim. Oivsim es agomol is to force feed the camel, and dorsim is to squeeze the food in her mouth. That you can do. Avomal itim, which is putting the food in the mouth, and she can choose if to swallow it or not, that is allowed. Ein mamri v'sagolim avomal itim oisum. Similarly, you cannot force feed the calves, but you could give them food and they decide if to swallow it or not. Mamir means to fatten the calves, and that's putting the food in a way that forces them to eat. Which is similar to mal'itin we mentioned before. You give it to the tanagolim and they choose it to swallow it or not. One could put water on the bran for the chickens to eat it, but you're not allowed to mix it together. That's really tikkun oichel, which is unnecessary. You can't put water in front of the bees, or pigeons, which are the nests, which don't belong to anybody specifically. He's not responsible for the food. But one could give food in front of geese, in front of chicken, and in front of pigeons that are being grown in the house, which he's responsible to feed. One could cut up gourds in front of an animal, and he could cut up an animal in front of the dog. And the chiddush is here, even though the animal was meant for an adam, you still could do it for an animal, because whatever is muchen la'adam is muchen la'klavim. Whatever is ready for a human is ready for an animal as well. He says, if it wasn't an avail before Shabbos, so you can't give it to the animal, because muchen la'adam is not muchen to the klavim. Halacha A, zok the Mishnah. Mefir nedarim b'Shabbos, v'nishalim nedarim shelatzorech Shabbos. How far as nedarim is done for a husband is made for a neder for his wife, and a father for his daughter. And nishalim means to go to a rabbi for him to do a sheilas neder. So that you could do if it's the tzorech Shabbos. Any neder which is for Shabbos, one could do it on Shabbos. Poikikim and samar, if there's a hole, one can close the hole, meaning closing a window in the wall. Umoididim is samatlis is a mikvah. You can measure a cloth to see if it has the shear of tumah, and you can measure the mikvah to see if it's enough for a person to become tahor. Why? Because you can do measurements for tzorech mitzvah. Says the Mishnah, there was a story in those days. They closed the window with a type of clay to make sure the tumah doesn't come in. And they tied a small pitcher of clay with gemi in order to measure the gigis, which is a piece of clay, to see if there's tefach there or not. So the story, in short, according to Rashi in Masechah Shabbos, the last daf in the Masechah Shabbos in the Bavli, there were two houses, and between the houses there was an alley, and on top of the alley there was a piece of clay covering that alley. Now, in one of the houses, there was somebody who was about to die, and if there will be a mace in the house, the tumah will come out through the window and go into the alley. And because the alley is covered and it has an oil, so the tumah will continue on to the other side, go into the window, into the next house, and make the next house tomeh b'tumas meis. So first of all, they seal the window. They put a piece of clay on the window so it does not allow the tumah to come in. But then they needed to open the window. So they needed to know if the tumah that will come through the window and go through the alley will spread into the next house. Well, it depends on. If the alley has an open space above, the tumah will go up and will go through the hole and will not spread on. But the shaila is, there was a clay covering the alley and there was a hole in the clay. And the question is, was that hole the size of a tefach to allow the tumah to go up, or the hole was less than a tefach? They need to measure that to make sure, is the tumah have a space to go up, or it's going to spread into the house. So how do you measure that hole? They took a small pitcher of clay. They tied it up to a gemi, to a string. And they brought it up to that hole to check if the hole, what's the size of the hole? So in order to do that, they did three things over here. First of all, they closed the window. As we mentioned before, they put a seal on the window. Number two is they measured this pitcher of clay to make sure it's the size of a tefach. And number three, they tied it to a gemi. So three things they did here for the tzorech mitzvah. So that's what the Mishnah says, from them we learn, shepoikikim, closing the window. Umoididim, you measure the size of the clay. Vekoishrim, and you allow to tie, and all that can be done on Shabbos because it's tzorech mitzvah. And with this, we come to the end of Maseches Shabbos and the Yerushalmi, Be'ezer Hashem, B'siyata D'Shmayo. Be'ezer Hashem, together we should continue and finish the entire Shas Yerushalmi. With this we conclude Yerushalmi Shabbos, Daf Kuf Yud Gimel.